Well, we are live. Hello and welcome to Breaking Culture Live. My name is Sean Johnson Andrews, and I'm your host. I'm the immediate past president of the Cultural Studies Association, and I'm broadcasting from Chicago. I'm really pleased today to welcome Luchina Fisher and Stephen Chukumba, who are here to talk to us about the documentary The Dads, which is about fathers and male caregivers of trans and gender expansive kids, and the Dads Foundation, the organization that helped to bring together the participants of the film. Luchina Fisher is an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker, educator, and speaker. Her latest film, the feature documentary The Dads, is a follow-up to the Emmy Award-winning short documentary of the same name, which is available on Netflix right now. Don't go watch it right now, but afterwards, go watch it. Both are executive produced by former NBA Hall of Famer Dwyane Wade. Her feature directorial debut, Mama Gloria, which followed fellow Chicagoan here, Mama Gloria Allen, was nominated for a 2022 GLAAD Media Award and broadcast on PBS. Fisher began her career as a journalist, writing for the Miami Herald, People, the Oprah Magazine, and ABC News, and is a 2026 inductee into the North Carolina Media and Journalism Hall of Fame for her social justice filmmaking. I don't have an air horn, but we could do that here. Uh,
Absolutely.
she sits on the board of the New York Women in Film and Television and teaches film at Wesleyan University. Thank you so much for joining us, Luchina.
Thank you, Sean, for having me, and Stephen. And
And Stephen Chukumba is the founder and executive director of the Dads Foundation, a national organization supporting fathers and male caregivers of gender expansive children. He is also a member of the human rights campaign's Parents for Transgender Equality Council and a co-founder of Rainbow in Black, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit that provides tools to Black families of trans youth. He is a producer of the Dads feature and a participant in both the feature and the short. Stephen is raising and amplifying the voices and issues and concerns of fathers and gender expansive people and their families nationwide. So I'm really honored to host you today, Stephen.
Thank you for having us, Sean. It is an honor.
I'm want to get into the meatier questions about both of your work, but I thought that we might start with a bit of an origin story.
mm,
Uh, so the documentary short, which is now available on Netflix again, was filmed in 2022, it seems,
yeah,
and it appears to be a convergence of sorts. We see Stephen and some of the men who eventually become the core kernel of the Dodds Foundation that we follow in the feature documentary, but they're joined or even led by Dennis Shepard, who is Matthew Shepard's father, and Wayne Maines, whose daughter Nicole became a very prominent figure in the post tipping point struggle for the rights of trans kids. And of course, behind the camera is Luchina, who had just finished another award winning feature about the Chicago's own trans hero, Mama Gloria Allen. So this is a powerful intersection of energies, which explains its 2024 Emmy Award for Outstanding Short Program. Can you say a bit about what led to this convergence?
yeah. Well, thank you for the question. Um, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said intersectional and intersection. For me, um, my work is at the intersection of race, gender, and identity. And part of that is being a Black woman, of course, but also being the mother of a trans child and the sister of gay and queer siblings. And that really informs my work. Um, when I set out to do Mama Gloria, I really came from the lens of a mother's love because I recognized that she had that love of her mother, her grandmother, um, growing up on the south side of Chicago at a time before the word trans existed. So for me, that was really the film about her taking that love and bringing it forward to her chosen children.
Mm.
Um, and when I met these fathers, Wayne, Dennis, Frank, at a conference for LGBTQ youth in DC through the Human Rights Campaign, and overheard them talking about taking a regular trip to the woods to go hunt or fish. And I just loved that juxtaposition of these two seemingly disparate things.
Mm-hmm.
And thought that was a really interesting intersection to explore. What does it mean to be just a regular guy who is also showing up for trans and queer youth? And so I invited myself along on their trip and suggested we bring some cameras. And they loved the idea, and so did Human Rights Campaign. And we partnered together to make that happen over a weekend. And I remember Dennis Shepard talking about, um, I don't feel like I should be part of this. This is a group of dads of trans kids. And I was like, Dennis, you don't understand. You're the blueprint. You're the one who laid this foundation for parents, especially dads, to be public in their support for LGBTQ young people. And he had to figure out a way to do that at a time when it wasn't popular and still not popular.
Not particularly
Sure.
popular.
Right. But without Dennis, right, many of us wouldn't be advocates,
Absolutely.
doing this work. Dennis and Judy are, the beginning. They're, the
Mm-hmm.
ones that really set the tone on this. And so it was important that he be there. And, Stephen, um, interestingly, the way the film flows, it starts with Dennis Shepard, talking about it being some 20 plus years since he'd been fishing. Really, the last time was with his son Matthew, which I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know when we went on this trip. And again, for him to open his heart in that way was profound.
Yeah.
Um, and then the film ends with Stephen, right? He, to me, represents where we are now in this moment, a dad of color who is, speaking out and trying to galvanize a movement of fathers to show up for their trans and gender expansive kids. And that's what he's saying at the end of the film. So the short became the catalyst for the Dad's Foundation, and that then became what we started filming on the feature. It's a beautiful kind of uh,
Passing of the baton.
passing of the baton.
That just gave me the chills. Like, we've been doing this for so long. This is the first time I've heard you describe that thread from Dennis to me. That's really beautiful.
Really? I thought
Yes.
you knew.
So again, I mean, I know our story, you know what I mean, but I've never heard, like, you're so close to this,
Right.
and we rock so hard that I'm like, yeah, it's Luchina, whatever. It's like my big sister. That's the first time I really appreciated the depth of what you say when you say passing the baton. Like, that's a movement that started with that's the OG. Dennis Shepard is the OG when it comes to dads standing up for their children. I met him at the same time to Thrive that I met you.
Oh, wow.
And this man is the blueprint of affirming parenting, of supportive parents, of people who, even in Matthew's death, he is telling people that it is important to protect all children. Like, that is what he and Judy have dedicated themselves to. And that's the ethos that I carry with me in my advocacy, because it's like, I'm not all of these children's parent, caregiver, but I see the need for a parent like Luchina and I in all of these kids. And as a father, I don't see fathers out here in these streets fighting for their children. I see a damn lot of mothers, hella mothers. And that to me is just offensive. Like, that doesn't even compute to me, considering we're talking about our children. It takes two people to create that child. So why is only one of them out here ensuring that that child is protected from the state, from intrusion of the federal government, from bullies? Like, it really is incumbent upon fathers to step up. And that's what happened when Luchina put us on that trip together.
Mm-hmm.
And captured what happened with us, it was that we recognized that what we feel and the perspective that we have on our children needs to be something that's shared out widely. And we need to have as many people talking about this as possible, because who wants their children? Which of us wants our children to come to any harm just because they exist?
No, hopefully none of us. I mean, I think that should be the answer. None of
Right.
us.
That should be the
Right.
answer, but unfortunately, it is not the answer. Like, that is not what's happening today. People are actively engaged in programs to harm our children,
Mhm.
actively filing legislation year after year. The number of bills introduced this year eclipsed all previous years within the first month.
Yeah.
That's
It's
just insane. And that other people don't recognize, like, the dissonance behind that fact. Like, we have high gas prices, we have, housing crisis, we have energy crisis, we have a economic in the gutter, an economy in the gutter, and yet we have more bills about trans people than anything else in our country.
Yeah.
it's pretty staggering for sure. And I wanna come back to that because I feel like the first film almost is in a moment when that hasn't quite hit yet,
Mm.
Yeah.
right? The short.
Yeah.
The short is there, and it is a sort of it's more of this communion of these folks who've been working on this and who are about to start working on it, right? Because the other figure in there is Wayne Maines, who was also certainly Matthew Shepard's dad, Dennis Shepard. He's got a really important role to play there, but also Wayne Maines is also he's kind of like sets up the groundwork, or at least has been blazed a trail of a sort, taking a stand for his daughter Nicole. And one of the things that he says is that he just kind of needed to get out of the way. Once he figured out the problem, it wasn't her problem; it was his problem,
Yeah.
right? Um, uh, so and so I feel like that first short. I mean, I was struck by the impetus there. Like, I have two kids that are basically gender renegades of one kind or another,
I
right?
love that, a
Um,
gender renegade.
and they've always engaged in a gender journey that I didn't know was possible when I was their age. So I'm struck by the role that gender plays in the film, and particularly there's a very particular conception of masculinity at work in bringing these men together to hunt, to fish, to be outdoors. And Luchina, you said that was part of what was interesting about it, was the contrast there. So I guess that I mean, my question originally was that intentional, but it sounds like that just kind of happened. That this kind of particular conception of masculinity was being put in contrast with, or at least in conversation with, this role that fathers can play.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also recognizing when that is a powerful uh, s- narrative device. When that is a powerful theme.
Mhm.
And I think if I had not been the child of a very hyper masculine father, he was a drill
Mm.
sergeant, two-time Vietnam vet, um, Black man growing up during segregation, literally had to pull himself up by his bootstraps, right? And use his GI Bill to get his master's degree, to get his GED first. My dad was a force, but so was my brother, who was a gay man, and in some ways more passive, but intellectually more sharp and fierce. And so I had these two male role models growing up, and they often clashed. And seeing that as I grew up, really, for me, was that is not how I want to parent a child.
Mhm.
There was a lot of estrangement between them that I think did neither any good. Um, and so, yeah, when I became a parent and it was clear that my child was was trans, I knew I had to make a different choice, but I also saw how my father ultimately came around and really was like, don't be like me. And that was also a really powerful,
Interesting.
um, yeah, that was a powerful message that he left me. And while he's no longer here and he's not unfortunately been able to see the success of the dads, he informs, who I am as a filmmaker, right?
Sure.
And that I could identify those men in a way that, wow, this is really powerful who they are, what they represent, and what they're saying. And and how that contrasts so greatly with what people think of the queer community and its allies. And so I knew, like, for me it was important um to really lean into that. Like, let's go to a rural place in America. Let's go.
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma.
Broken Bow, Oklahoma is where
Broken
it
bow.
led us to, just so we're clear.
Let's go to the woods. And, honestly, if there is, you mentioned Wayne Maines. I mean, his book, Becoming Nicole, for many families of trans kids, that book was um, also foundational. Understanding what his family went through when his child was outed in school in Maine and, attacked publicly, and it became national news. Um, but Wayne, for him, like, the outdoors is this sacred place for many men. It is. It's the place you go to clear your head, to get away from the family, to, like,
Hmm.
come up with solutions to things. And so that being his refuge, but also, this place that we identify with masculinity, I think was really interesting to me. And I thought, let's just put them in this setting and see what happens and get this diverse intersection of men, who have, different geographies, different experiences, different ages, different races. Let's see what it's like for them to be in conversation and connected by the love they have for their children. And we just sat back and they took it away, honestly.
Yeah, we weren't even aware that they were there. Like that's how intimate the setting was, because we had some really raw, vulnerable conversations that I didn't anticipate. Like I could not have fathomed that going to the woods with a bunch of white dudes would turn me into the advocate that I am. That was not on my bingo sheet. And so I'm I'm really like grateful to Luchina. I'm grateful to HRC for having the Parents for Transgender Equality Council in the first place, for coming up with the idea of, filming a PSA about people having conversations, vulnerable, about dads having vulnerable conversations, because, you know, Luchina having captured that, and that premiering at South by in 2023, and then going on the little festival circuit with the short, and talking to people about what they saw on the screen, about
Hmm.
how the story connected with them. Like, that there were mothers who were like, I wish my husband was here to see that,
Mm,
who had children who were queer or in, gender expansive, but who didn't support or were embarrassed to support. And that's a lot of what I found is the reason that men don't publicly support their children is because that there's that shame. There's an internal shame, is that internal grappling that Wayne was talking about, that you do when you're confronted with something that society doesn't really support. Like, you yourself didn't really support. Like, I know how much
Right.
misogyny and transphobia and homophobia I had in me up
Yeah.
until my son told me who he was. And I was like, wow, I was quite a jerk. Like, I have a different word for it, but I don't want to offend people,
Well,
but
yeah, and it's like that's what masculinity means
yeah,
almost. I think that
absolutely.
there's something in a Substack post you made last month. You were talking with another he was another Black father who's just in a different place in this journey than you are. And one of the things you said he had to struggle with was the fact that the person he had known as his son was in fact his daughter. And you kind of mentioned something similar to this when you talk about your son Hobbs coming out as a trans man, because you say, if nothing else, it kind of upsets the gender symmetry that you had in the family. You had two boys and two girls, and now it's like, and
I
I
felt
wonder,
it at
like,
a visceral level, Sean.
what's that?
I felt it at a visceral level.
It's real. It's
Yeah, but I wonder, like, in working with these fathers, how much of our gender, especially as men, but I'm sure we could talk about this as women too, is wrapped up in the gender of our kids, or vice versa. So that there's something that's different. I was talking with another scholar last month. And I was talking about this person I saw on the train here in Chicago, and he had a little baby in a stroller with his wife. I'm gonna use the pronouns that that's how they were appearing. And on his shirt it said "Girl Dad 2025." You know, and I'm just thinking, like, what does it mean to be a girl dad? And that concept of, well, I'm a girl dad. Well, no, actually, maybe I'm not. What does that do to
Maybe
me?
you're not. I gave the same advice to someone recently who had just had, their children are young, 8 and 3. And
Hmm.
I told her, I was like, let your children be whoever they are.
mm,
Don't put your expectation of who your child is going to be based on what some doctor told you their genitals said. Let that child tell you who they are, because when you don't attach expectation to your children, then they don't fear sharing who they are with you,
mm,
because they know that you're not caught up in whether or not you're going to walk your daughter down the aisle, or whether or not you're going to throw the pigskin with your son. Like, if these things aren't things that you're tethered to, then when they don't happen, you're okay with it, because you would never built up in your mind for it to be this great thing that you were going to share.
yeah.
Like, let
Yeah,
your child define what their moments are going to be. Don't try to define your moments for your child. And in this respect, we do carry gender into our parenting. We definitely carry gender into our parenting, and we definitely treat our children according to what we think they are. We coo at the girls and we talk tough to the boys. That's just how we're programmed. And because we're programmed in that way, when that child tells us that they're not what we think they are because of our programming, it is very difficult to deprogram yourself from all of the cues that you've been getting all of your life about pink and blue, and you know lead and follow. Like, all of those
yeah.
things are things that you have to actively, intentionally unlearn to meet your children where they are.
mm, mm,
And that seems like that was much of the work of the short, was kind of exploring some of that, and that's still threaded through the feature, right? It's still threaded through the feature, but the struggle becomes as much external as it is internal, it seems, in the feature. I mean, there's some of that atmosphere in the first in the short, but it's mostly you're in Broken Bow, and you're able to just kind of huddle and have these conversations. But in the feature, we see the looming threats against transgender care in Texas, which one of the protagonists calls the canary in the coal mine. It quickly spills over, as we all know, into the 2024 election campaign, with hundreds of billions of, not billions, it feels like billions, hundreds of millions,
Billions,
it
yeah.
feels like billions, um, in anti-trans advertising, and all these executive orders, and that becomes kind of the drumbeat for the feature. And by the end of the film, we have many of the original dads fleeing the country, joining the estimated 400,000 transgender refugees. So uh, I know I don't imagine that this was what you expected the trajectory of the film would be when you started, right? So how did that fit into your expectations when you started the film, and then maybe for Stephen, how the Dads Foundation is dealing with those shifts,
mm.
both during
Yeah,
the film and then afterwards?
yeah, no, you're so astute. It's true that we didn't set out to make the film that you ultimately see in the feature. We really just wanted to carry on filming more with the dads. I think
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmingly the response that we got from the short was, we wanted more, you know, is there more? We want to see these fathers at home. We want to meet their children. And so when the Dad's Foundation formed and they continued having these retreats, Stephen was wise enough to, you know, have a camera crew at that second retreat and keep filming. And I looked at the footage and felt like, okay, we could expand this. And I do remember at one point, you know, before the election happened, feeling like, you know, are we telling a different story here than the short? You know, there's not an obvious tension here that's different from the tension that existed in the short, where, you know, there is that feeling of um, safety and worry about your children, but mostly you're right. It was this internal journey that these men had to take to get to where they were. And then of course we were seeing what was happening with the election, and that trans was becoming, and Project 2025 was making sure that this was the target
Mm-hmm.
for so much of the election. And I just remember, you know, watching the returns that night, and you know, of course, feeling all of the emotions around, you know, your
Sure.
stomach dropping and like, oh my God, what, you know, what are we gonna do? And and then realizing, like, you know, also we're carrying all these families, you
Yeah.
know, who are connected
Yeah.
to the film, and what are they gonna do? And how are we going to keep filming with them? What is going to happen? And you know, everyone was on board with, you know, like, let's keep it going. Some families obviously needed to take a step back, feeling like, you know, now they were in the crosshairs,
Yeah.
you know, in a way that they hadn't been before, as, you know, many of these families are advocates, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are the people who are public and, you know, joining the lawsuits and going to the legislature every year. And so some people did need to take a step back. But a number of folks were like, you know, like, I want to keep filming, and let's see where this ends up. And believe me, it was hard. These are my friends.
Yeah.
And you know, it was quite shocking when one of the families left very suddenly, and we won't give away any spoilers to the film, but you know, there's the what's happening, and we have to document it, and then there's, you know, how we're all responding to what's happening and taking care of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
our emotional state during, you know, the filming that needed to happen. um so yeah, it is a film of this time, of this moment. As a former journalist, I felt it was critical that we
Yeah.
capture that, and no one can say it didn't happen.
Yeah.
And honestly, we didn't even know the extent to the number of trans political refugees, people who have left their hometowns because they don't feel safe, supported, or can get access to their health care. Um, we didn't even know the extent of it until we were um, finishing our post. So it is
It's
all
a lot.
landing at a very,
Yeah,
you know,
it was a
timely
lot
moment. Mhm.
because, you know, we, as Luchina said, we were like, we're just going to keep filming. We pulled up with the families and we said, hey, you know, like, people's safety is really at risk. So if folks don't want to do it, like, we understand. And we had the conversation with all the principals, all the people that you see on film. We had that conversation, and everybody, bar none, was like, yeah, let's keep going, because it was that important. And we recognized it was that important. And people still had to do what they had to do to keep their families safe, but they were all committed to us finishing this story because it was so important. Like, we wouldn't want history to pass and no one to be able to say what happened. We are testifying through this film about this present moment that we're in and what's really at stake. People don't really seem to be connecting the dots between the attacks on immigrants and the attacks on trans people and the attacks on reproductive care and this kind of like isolationist kind of mindset, but it's all reinforcing kind of this larger, white supremacy, patriarchy. There are things that are just afoot that people just need to know. And we were very intentional about making sure that people knew what happened, what's happening in this moment. Like, there were I talked about at the top, all of the bills that have been introduced in just the first month of his, second term.
Yeah. No, and the attempt to sort of take executive power to that level where you can dictate healthcare for the entire country, right? That's been it's pretty amazing. And then hospitals agreeing effectively, right? Just sort of just kind of complying in
Capitulating.
advance.
It's true. And I remember one of our editors, Patrick Wright, saying to me, Luchina, you've captured the collapse of gender affirming care. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah, you're like, we have. Like, we didn't know
Right.
that everything was gonna fall like dominoes so
Yeah.
quickly. It was
Well, and you kind of end with Skermeti in a lot of ways. Like, was that a sort of like was it kind of like, because as I was watching, I was kind of like, how far is this going to go? Like, I know where I am, I know what comes after this, and then I was just sort of like, okay, so Skermeti, is that we sort of like, okay, that's the end point.
Skermeti, and then the Skermeti decision comes down, and then all the dominoes that fall. And to see, in Connecticut, right, where, we live, blue state, a haven,
Hmm.
for so many of these refugees, for them to then say, we're closing the gender clinics, um, at Yale, at Children's Hospital, Rush Hospital in Chicago.
Yeah.
It's like, what is
What's
going
happening? Yeah.
on?
Yeah.
What's
And
happening?
it was so quick, Sean, as you know, like it just
No, it's been it gives you whiplash watching it all
Literally.
happen.
every day
Um,
something new.
um, the I wondered about the families. I know they put themselves out there. Have many of them? I know many of them have left, but have they been threatened, or is that a thing that they've also had to deal with, or has that been less prominent?
So, I mean, I'm not gonna like name names.
Sure.
So, being on the front lines of this particular social issue subjects you to a lot of hatred. We are seeing in real time this 19-year-old trans girl,
Mm.
Yeah.
Juniper Blessing, in Seattle, gets murdered, and people are making fun of her death
Yeah.
online. So, like, I don't need to say that advocates and activists in the transgender space are victims of hateful attacks. Like, that's a fact. And we are very clear about like maintaining people's safety. So, like, the families have had to do what they've had to do to protect themselves, withdrawing from, public life in certain circumstances, not testifying at state capitals and others
Hmm.
because, they don't feel safe. But we also recognize that that is their tactic. That is the thing that they are trying to wield against us, is for people to be afraid. And if everyone's afraid, then no one can fight. And if no one fights, then they win. And that's something that I can't. I have a child who I refuse to stop fighting for until you stop fighting against his ability to exist. And so, like, yeah, we're doing what we have to do to stay safe, but we recognize that, sometimes sacrifice is the only way forward.
And I think everybody in this moment has to think about, what can I do, within, obviously, thinking of their safety and their family's safety. But I'm speaking to everybody, allies, people on the sidelines, people who think they don't have
Skin in the game.
skin in the game.
Mhm.
That, we all have to be thinking about, like, is this right? Is this neighborly? Is this the way that we want? What would we do if we were in that situation?
Yeah.
So it could be as simple as, saying, I'm not, why are you making fun of that person? That person was killed
Yeah.
through violence, like, it could be, for me, I'm a storyteller. I'm always going to use storytelling as my advocacy.
Right.
And I'm gonna, assert my First Amendment right to do that. It's starting a foundation. It's, creating a space for people to come. It's, joining the Ali Forney Center as our impact partner on this film, so we can talk about, what happens when you show up as allies, and what happens when you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we all have to ask ourselves in this moment, with all of the things happening, what can I do? Because those little actions actually make a difference. Doesn't mean
Absolutely.
you have to be out there on the streets. Some people, that's, what they feel they need to do. But think about what you can do in this moment, for the most marginalized, because guess what? It's not just about them.
No, you got to. If you read the poem until the end, you know what happens, right?
You know what happens. They will come for you.
Um, well, that kind of leads me to I know the film is mostly about gender and transgender, but as Stephen put it in a recent quote, a lot of anti-trans rhetoric and ideology is rooted in anti-blackness. And so I know, Luchina, much of your past work deals with lifting up the experiences of Black women, whether it's two Black female athletes in Team Dream or the Black single mothers in Detroit fighting for home ownership and locked out. So I'd be grateful to have you tell us a bit about some of that other work. But also, I wonder if you see something similar in the struggle of these mostly white, declaredly male protagonists in the dads. Is this a departure, or is it a continuity with your other work?
Oh my God, it's such a continuity, because and they don't know it, but for a lot of them, this is the beauty of having a child who is gender expansive, who is a gender renegade, right? Because they're going to teach,
Hmm.
dads. They're going to teach men. They're going to teach white men,
White people,
white
white
people,
men.
right? A lot of stuff about what it means to be outside of the norm, outside of the majority. And so for a lot of these fathers, they're coming to that understanding for the first time. They're experiencing discrimination and hatred, some of them for the first time, simply because of who their children are. Isn't that what Black people have
Facts.
experienced?
Facts.
Like, since,
The beginning of time.
since we landed here,
Well,
you
since you
know.
landed here, that's not
Okay, so
not the
I'll
beginning
say
of
since
time.
the
Not the beginning
beginning
of
of
time.
time in America,
There we
and
go.
when
There we
they
go.
landed imperialistically on our shores in Africa. So let's
Well,
be
there.
clear, like,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Right. But so, there is a through line here. And, for me, of course, as a Black woman, I see through that lens, but, I grew up an army brat. I lived in so many different places, including Germany. And, being outside of this country at a
Hmm.
time when I was growing up, living in an all German town, but being seen as American, not as a Black person first, really allowed me to see some things that I think, unfortunately, a lot of Black Americans don't have that experience of. Can you get outside of the culture for a moment to like see yourself as a full, human being, not like how others perceive you? And I think that's a really important thing that we all need to experience in our own lives, but we also have to see our neighbors in that way. And so for me, that's always been, part of my DNA is like, how can I connect us to our greater humanity? Because I have glimpsed it. I know
Hmm.
you've glimpsed it,
Absolutely.
and you've done it because your child brought you into
Absolutely.
the fold. And that's the beauty. If you open your heart, you can maybe experience that. For many people, that's maybe through religion, but we know how religion also gets used and abused. So it's really going back to this, sense of what is our common humanity? How can we see people in a more human way? These men need to see themselves in in the full humanity. They need to see their feminine, their vulnerable side. And they are experiencing that when they come together and these retreats. And we are sharing that now with the world. So for me, it is a continuation of this work. And whenever I have the opportunity to bring more people into that fold,
Hmm.
I'm going to take it.
So I have a related question for you, Stephen, because I know that you have another foundation or another organization you've just recently started called Rainbow and Black. And I'm wondering how that venture intersects with the work of the Dad's Foundation. And I was, and race seems to be a really important element here. And I was wondering, like, does the fact that we need both the Dad's Foundation and Rainbow and Black, does that reflect something about how race continues to divide our potential solidarities, or is there something else that you would say about that?
All right. Well, I think that the recent Supreme Court decision,
Hmm.
which gutted the voting
Which
rights
one?
act.
I mean, come on, there's so many
No,
that are
that's a
terrible.
facts.
The
But yeah,
voting
I mean,
rights one, or the one about letting schools discriminate against people? So, no, go ahead.
Sean, I mean, how much time you got?
Oh boy.
Unfortunately, not
But
we
yeah,
can do another episode.
I think we'll have to. I
Part
think we'll
two.
have to. But I do think to respond to your question, the reality is that when I started in advocacy, I saw that the perspectives that were being framed and concerned about were not the ones that reflected my reality. I didn't see people talking about the discrimination that I and my childhood experienced trying to get medical care because we were Black.
Hmm.
Beyond the transness, like the all of the adding on the Black piece
Mm.
to just mundane pedestrian interactions is a part that people in advocacy don't understand. Even in advocacy spaces, the racism that exists there. So it's like there's a double-edged sword in advocacy for people of color, which is why Rainbow Black was became necessary so that we could talk about the very unique experiences of people of color in these spaces and provide them solutions and support about how to resolve those things. And so it fills a very different need in advocacy than the Dad's Foundation fills in terms of like bringing fathers to the fore in the movement of
Mm.
all, stripes, because there aren't very many Black people You know, there aren't many support systems for Black people, and so
Absolutely.
Rainbow Black became something that filled a very necessary gap that existed in the space. And obviously, we're all movements tethered together. There is no real separation. We're all fighting for the same thing. We're just doing it from a space that we feel comfortable and safe to be able to do. Like what Luchina said earlier, like, you know, we all have our own spaces where we feel comfortable and safe. And so this was one of those. And so it was really important for me to start Rainbow and Black and the Jazz Foundation because I felt they were serving two distinct needs.
No, that makes sense. I mean, unfortunately, it makes sense.
Unfortunately, yes.
Unfortunately, it makes sense. I mean, I think that it's very indicative of what we're up against. That though that the same people who have been so vocal against trans people, right before that were against critical race theory, right? I mean, those are the two things that kind of animated the right wing, and so these are clearly touching on very similar, I guess, lines of energy in the and lines of contention in the culture. So, um, but maybe there's going to be a place then that the dads and the Rainbow and Black. It'd be great if the Dads Foundation, if the white guys who are largely in the Dads Foundation would also be kind of standing up for the people of color who have other difficulties in kind of accessing our very segregated racial medical care system. So that
Mhm.
maybe that's the next dream.
Yeah. Well,
um,
and just seeing how these boats
Intersection.
are tied
Yeah.
together. I think
yeah,
you said it so well. It's like when one boat lifts, it lifts all. So it's like it, the folks in power want you to think
but we're
yourself
divided.
Absolutely.
that you're
Yeah.
separated by all of these things. But honestly, there's more of us,
Hmm.
who don't fit into into that narrow slice that, own most things and are, running things right now. Um, and if we got together, wow,
Yeah, that's the
Seems
imagine
like
like
what we could
if we
do.
could get together, if the things that separated us were not there and we could see the commonality that exists between us, the humanity between us, and if we all could recognize that it's that 1% that is controlling all of the suffering that we are collectively experiencing, if we could get to that point, we could do amazing things. It's the North coming down to the South to help them avoid the racial gerrymandering that's taking place.
mhm,
It's people seeing that these systems of oppression oppress us all. And even though it looks like they're just doing that thing to that one small group over there, recognize that they're doing it also to you in ways that you just aren't necessarily perceiving or receiving. Gas prices being higher, food prices being higher, companies being reimbursed, you know, tariffs, but not that money not trickling down to the consumers who actually paid the tariff. So there's so many things that are happening that people are just not paying attention to, perhaps because of the breakneck speed of
Mm.
all the
yeah,
crazy things that are happening on any given day. It's hard to really focus and pay attention to the more things that we have in common than that we have separating us. But we are constantly focusing on the things that separate us. And that's I think where we lose and why movies like this are hopefully going to break some of those barriers. Be like, hey, I have a
yeah,
lot in common with that dad, that hunter,
yeah,
that fisherman, that Republican. I have a lot in common with the person who looks just like me that I go down to the watering hole and have throwing back with. Like I have a lot more in common with this dude than I would have thought. Let me hear what he has to say. Like, oh, I had never thought about that. And wait, now you put it that way. And so we're hoping we can have those moments of connection with people who otherwise wouldn't engage in like, the LGBTQ plus movement. They're like, I go fishing with that guy. We're hoping that that can be the thing that breaks through and helps people see that we have more in common than we have that separates us.
yeah. And I think one of the things that happens frequently in the film is someone says, "I've lost all my friends in my
Mm.
community because they don't understand this." And I think that that's the other piece where you're kind of like, "Well, that's just wrong." like, and so maybe there's a way that that will inspire people on the ground to kind of go, well, I saw the hurt that that caused to this person over here when they were rejected by their community, and so maybe as a member of that community or of another community, I will kind of take it upon myself to not, you know, lean into that, and to be more accepting. So, I mean, I was going to ask, it's very difficult to stay positive, but this seems like, with all the bills, even when there's a judge that strikes one of them down, there's 10 more, and in the pipeline. Um, but this seems to be maybe that if I was going to ask you how do you stay positive, maybe this is it. We're creating solidarity across these lines and thinking
Yeah.
about how to work together.
Yeah, absolutely. Creating solidarity, creating art. I
Hmm.
mean, this is also a very hopeful and warm film. It's not
Here it is.
dark and yes, you're going to go through the gamut of emotions, but most people just want to hug you afterward. They just want to be more connected. And I think for me, as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, there's always the other side of the coin of whatever you're going through. If you're experiencing loss, on the other side of that can be connection, can be resilience, can be joy. And I think as someone who's, grappled with loss and displacement and very early in my life, I have had to find that hope on the other side. You can choose, obviously, how you react to things. Um, but I think for me as a storyteller, I always want to put into the world that sense of hope, of joy, of love, ultimately. That's the force that is
Hmm.
greater than all of this. And we have to bring more love into the world. We can't respond to this only through anger, through hate and vitriol, because that's going to keep us stuck, And so, what you're seeing, in these fathers, in these families, is real love
Yeah,
for one another, for
yeah.
their children, for um, this country, for humanity.
Yeah.
I
Well,
think
well,
it's
I know you, oh, go
the
ahead, Stephen. Sorry.
I think it's the community. The community is something that sustains me. These men and the chosen family that I have picked up along the way has been the thing, has made the difference.
Yeah.
And I think what really resonates with fathers when they come to those retreats is that connection, is that immediate built-in community that you have when you join us.
Mhm.
It's not a feeling that you can replicate elsewhere. Like you get it or you don't get it. And in these groups and in these spaces, we get that like life affirming love that
Mm.
Luchina was talking about. And so that community that we built has been the thing that has enabled all of us to sustain ourselves through what had been very, very difficult times of recent.
Well, I know you've had premieres in Austin and Milwaukee, and you just had a benefit for the Ali Forney Center in New York. So how has the full length film, been received, and what's next? And also, I want to make sure you get to talk a little bit about this relationship with the Ali Forney Center because I know that's important.
Yeah. I mean, what an incredible organization. It's the largest organization for unhoused LGBTQ youth. It exists because of families rejecting their children. And thank God for the Ali Forney Center, um, that it's there to provide this home, not just a home, but a chosen family, loving care, what Mama Gloria was doing for homeless trans youth in Chicago through the Center on Halsted. They do, times, 100, and they have these satellites all over the country and the world. And they just had their gala where they raised like a record
$3 million.
I think it was like 6 million I saw in the email. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And it also is hopeful, because you see the people who recognize the need for this right now. And what we see is, of course, as this anti, LGBTQ rhetoric and, legislation and bills and, executive orders come down, there are more homeless and more young people who are made homeless. And we see the suicide rates go up. And, so there's a real need. And we were brought together with Ali Fournier through our partner Elevate Prize Foundation. And we're so grateful because it really gives us this opportunity to talk about what does allyship look like. Allyship, you see it with these dads. And now we see the importance of it and a way that you can plug in. You can plug in through the Ali Fournier Center. And so we're really grateful to be partnered with them, and we'll continue to do more activations, with our impact campaign as we're rolling out the film. And we've got a ton of screenings coming up. It's Pride Month in a week or so, and
Yeah.
And kicking it off will be New Fest Pride, our New York City premiere next Friday.
Okay.
So we're really excited about that, and our Bay Area premiere a couple weeks later at Cal Film in San Rafael. So yeah, I hope people will plug in thedadsfilm.com, right, to find out more.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes for everyone to check out the full film at a screening near you, hopefully.
Exactly.
It's a great film. It's like I said, it's heartwarming, even if there's times where it's gut wrenching. But it's a you've definitely captured an important moment in these people's lives and in the life of our country. So, thanks so much for sharing. So next week we'll be talking to Raylan Barnes about her monumental history, Darkology, Blackface, and the American Way of Entertainment. So if you're joining us, it will be streaming here on YouTube. This episode will be available on the Breaking Culture Live channel later today. Please share it with your colleagues. Let us know if you have ideas for future episodes or invitees by emailing us at breakingculturelive@gmail.com. Thanks again for joining us. Again, I'm Sean Johnson Andrews. Please check out my Substack at breakingculture.substack.com. Until next time.